Something explosive just happened inside the heart of British politics. Voices were raised, tempers flared, and the calm image of Parliament shattered in seconds. One man stood up, pointed straight at the government, and made a demand that could shake the entire United Kingdom. This was not a warning. This was not a suggestion. This was a direct challenge. Nigel Farage has just demanded an immediate election. And what he said next left the chamber stunned. The atmosphere inside Parliament was already tense, but no one expected what came next. As cameras rolled and MPs sat in their seats, Nigel Farage rose to speak with a look that signalled confrontation. His voice was steady, but the anger behind it was impossible to miss. He did not waste time with polite language or careful words. Instead, he went straight for the government, accusing it of losing control, losing trust, and losing the country. According to Farage, Britain is being pushed to the edge by leaders who refuse to listen to the public. He claimed that the people are angry, ignored, and desperate for change, and that Parliament no longer reflects the will of the nation. Farage pointed to rising living costs, uncontrolled immigration, and what he called total political paralysis. He said families are struggling while politicians argue, delay, and hide behind excuses. Every sentence he delivered seemed designed to provoke a reaction, and it worked. MPs shouted back, some laughing, others visibly furious. But Farage did not back down. He raised his voice and declared that the current government has no moral authority left to govern. He insisted that only a fresh election could restore democracy and give people their voice back. What made the moment even more explosive was the timing. Britain is already divided and trust in politics is dangerously low. Farage reminded the chamber that millions feel betrayed by broken promises and endless scandals. He accused mainstream parties of protecting themselves instead of protecting citizens. His words painted a picture of a country drifting without direction, led by elites who have lost touch with everyday reality. This was not just a speech, it was an accusation aimed at the entire political system. As he continued, the noise inside Parliament grew louder. Some MPs tried to interrupt, but Farage pushed forward, repeating his demand for an immediate general election. He said delaying it would only deepen the crisis and increase public anger. According to him, the longer this government stays in power, the more damage it causes. His message was clear and dangerous for those in charge. Step aside now or face the judgment of the people at the ballot box. Outside Parliament, the reaction was instant. Social media erupted within minutes, with supporters praising Farage for saying what others are afraid to say. Critics accused him of fueling chaos and division. But one thing became clear very quickly. This speech had struck a nerve. It reopened fears about political instability and raised serious questions about how long the current leadership can survive. With pressure mounting and anger rising, Farage's demand may be more than just words. It could be the spark that pushes Britain into its next political showdown. As the echoes of Farage's words spread beyond Parliament, the political temperature across the country began to rise. News channels replayed the moment again and again, freezing on his sharp expressions and forceful gestures. Commentators described it as one of the most aggressive demands for an election seen in years. Supporters argued that Farage had finally voiced the frustration millions feel in their daily lives. They said his speech reflected empty wallets, unsafe streets, and a growing belief that the system no longer works for ordinary people. To them, this was not extremism, it was honesty spoken out loud. Inside Westminster, however, panic quietly started to set in. Senior figures from major parties rushed into emergency meetings, trying to control the narrative before it spiralled further. Some attempted to dismiss Farage as a provocateur, claiming he thrives on disruption rather than solutions. Others took a more cautious tone, warning that ignoring such public anger could backfire badly. The truth was uncomfortable. Poll numbers were already fragile, and Farage's demand threatened to expose just how weak public confidence had become. What made this moment especially dangerous was Farage's ability to dominate attention. He did not need government power to shake the system. His influence came from timing and tone. Britain was already exhausted by political drama, and his speech poured fuel on that exhaustion. People who normally avoid politics suddenly started sharing clips, debating with friends, and questioning whether an election was now unavoidable. The conversation shifted fast, moving from if to when to yen. Farage also framed his demand as a democratic emergency. He argued that delaying an election was not stability, but fear of voters, fear of accountability. He claimed leaders were hiding behind procedure because they knew the public mood had turned against them. This message resonated deeply with those who feel locked out of decision-making. To them, an immediate election felt like the only peaceful way to release national pressure. Opponents warned that such rhetoric could destabilise the country at a critical time. They accused Farage of simplifying complex problems and offering elections as a magic fix. But even critics admitted one thing privately: his speech had shifted momentum. It forced everyone to respond on his terms. Silence was no longer an option, whether praised or condemned. Farage had once again proven his power to control the political conversation. As night fell, one question dominated headlines and homes alike. Was this just another dramatic moment or the beginning of something much bigger? With trust collapsing and anger rising, the demand for an immediate election no longer sounded impossible. It sounded close. Behind the dramatic headlines and fiery speeches, deeper fears began to surface within the political establishment. Farage's demand was not dangerous because of one speech alone, but because it exposed how fragile the situation had become. Years of broken promises, leadership changes, and public frustration had created a pressure cooker, and his words acted like a release valve. Many MPs privately admitted that they could feel the mood shifting, not just online, but in their own constituencies. Voters were angrier, more direct, and far less patient than before. What worried party leaders most was how easily Farage's message spread. He spoke in simple terms, using clear language that cut through political jargon. People did not need to agree with him on everything to understand his core message. The system feels stuck, and ordinary people are paying the price. That idea resonated far beyond his usual supporters. Even voters who disliked his style admitted that something felt deeply wrong with the current direction of the country. Farage also positioned himself as an outsider, speaking truth to power. Despite years in politics, he framed Parliament as a closed club, protecting its own interests while the public struggles outside. This framing was powerful because it matched how many people already felt. Rising rents, shrinking savings, and uncertainty about the future made his demand for an election feel urgent rather than reckless. In his narrative, an election was not chaos. It was clarity. Meanwhile, government officials tried to calm markets and reassure allies that stability would hold. Carefully worded statements emphasised procedure, timelines, and responsibility. But those messages struggled to compete with the raw emotion of Farage's speech. Technical explanations felt weak against direct anger. The gap between official language and public feeling grew wider by the hour. Political analysts began warning that ignoring this moment could be a serious mistake. History showed that when public frustration reaches a certain point, sudden shifts become possible. Farage had not created the anger, but he had given it a voice and a direction. By demanding an immediate election, he forced everyone to confront a question that they had hoped to delay. Who truly holds power right now, Parliament or the people? As debates continued late into the night, one reality became impossible to deny. The ground beneath British politics was moving. Whether Farage succeeded or failed, the system could not simply return to business as usual. Something had changed, and the consequences were still unfolding. As the political storm continued to grow, the focus shifted from Farage himself to what might happen next. His demand for an immediate election placed the government in a corner with no easy exit. If leaders ignored him, they risked appearing weak and disconnected from public anger. If they responded too strongly, they risked giving his words even more power. This delicate balance created visible hesitation at the top, and hesitation in politics often signals vulnerability. Public reaction became more intense by the hour. Phone-in shows were flooded with callers expressing frustration, fear and confusion. Some demanded change at any cost, while others worried about instability and uncertainty. Yet even among those who feared an election, many admitted they felt unheard. That emotional contradiction defined the moment. People were tired of chaos, but even more tired of feeling ignored. Farage had tapped into that exhaustion with precision. Within political parties, internal divisions began to surface. Some MPs quietly agreed that facing voters sooner might be better than dragging out an unpopular term. Others feared a total collapse at the polls. This internal conflict weakened unity and leaked into public view. When parties appear divided, public confidence erodes further. Farage's speech did not just challenge the government, it tested the strength of the entire system. What made the situation even more unpredictable was the sense that events were accelerating. Rumours spread quickly, speculation filled the gaps, and every silence from leadership was treated as a sign of trouble. Markets watched closely, international partners asked questions, and ordinary citizens wondered how secure the future really was. A single demand had triggered a chain reaction that no one fully controlled anymore. By the end of the day, one truth stood out clearly. Nigel Farage had once again proven his ability to disrupt British politics without holding office. Whether his call for an immediate election succeeds or not, the damage to political calm was already done. The pressure had been applied, the lines had been drawn, and the public was watching closely. Britain now stood at a crossroads, waiting to see whether its leaders would face the people or continue to resist a demand that refused to fade away. As the noise slowly settled, a deeper question lingered in the background, one that went beyond party politics or individual personalities. What happens when a large part of the population no longer believes the system represents them? Farage's demand for an immediate election forced this question into the open. It challenged the idea that stability comes from delay and suggested instead that real stability might only come from confrontation with the public mood. For many viewers watching from home, this was not about Farage at all. It was about whether their voices still mattered. The government's silence in the hours that followed spoke louder than any statement. Each delayed response fueled speculation and suspicion. People began reading meaning into every small gesture, every avoided question, every carefully chosen word. In politics, uncertainty is dangerous, and this moment was filled with it. Supporters of Farage saw hesitation as proof that the establishment was afraid. Opponents saw it as responsible caution. But the gap between these interpretations showed just how divided the country had become. What made this moment especially powerful was its emotional weight. Farage did not rely on complex policies or detailed plans. He relied on feeling, frustration, anger, fatigue. Those emotions already existed, and his speech simply brought them to the surface. Once exposed, they could not easily be pushed back down. That is why the demand for an election continued to echo long after the cameras moved on. It had become a symbol of release for people who felt trapped by endless political delay. Even those who strongly disagreed with Farage were forced to admit that something fundamental was shifting. Trust, once lost, is difficult to rebuild. The longer leaders avoided the question of an election, the more that trust eroded. Each day, without clarity, added to the sense that decisions were being made above the public, not with them. That perception alone was enough to keep the pressure alive. In the end, this moment may be remembered not for what Farage demanded, but for what it revealed: a country on edge, a political system under strain, and a growing belief that change, one way or another, is unavoidable. Whether through an immediate election or a slow reckoning, Britain had entered a new phase of political tension, and there was no simple path back to calm. As the story continued to unfold, attention slowly turned to the consequences of doing nothing. Political history shows that moments like this do not simply disappear. They either fade because leaders act decisively, or they grow because leaders hesitate. Farage's demand for an immediate election placed a clock on the system, even if no official deadline was announced. Every passing day without a clear response made the tension heavier and the silence louder. For ordinary people watching from the outside, the feeling was unsettling. Many were not deeply invested in party politics, but they could sense instability. When leaders avoid direct answers, trust weakens. When trust weakens, frustration hardens. Farage's speech had accelerated this process. It transformed quiet dissatisfaction into open debate. Conversations that once felt private were now happening everywhere. In homes, workplaces, and online spaces. Political insiders understood the risk clearly. Once the idea of an early election takes hold in the public mind, it becomes difficult to erase. Even if it does not happen immediately, the expectation remains. That expectation alone can paralyse decision-making. Governments begin to think in survival mode instead of long-term planning. Oppositions become more aggressive. Compromise becomes harder. The entire system starts to shake under its own weight. Farage may not control what happens next, but he has shaped the path forward. By forcing the election question into the spotlight, he changed the rules of the conversation. Leaders are no longer debating policies alone. They are debating legitimacy. That is a far more dangerous argument because once legitimacy is questioned, authority weakens everywhere at once. As Britain looks ahead, uncertainty dominates the landscape. Will leaders confront the public mood directly or continue to resist the pressure building beneath them? Will this moment pass quietly or will it mark the beginning of a political turning point? One thing is certain, the demand made in that explosive parliamentary moment has not faded. It is still hanging in the air, waiting for an answer that could reshape the country's future.